The habit loop is the fundamental building block of every habit you have. It's like a blueprint your brain follows over and over again. But what if I told you that by simply altering one element of this loop, you could change a habit that has plagued you for years? Imagine this. Every afternoon at around 3 p.m., you feel an overwhelming urge to take a break from work. Without thinking, you get up, walk to the kitchen, and grab a cookie. You don't even realize you're doing it until you're halfway through the cookie. Sound familiar? This is the habit loop in action. The 3 p.m. lull is the cue, grabbing the cookie is the routine, and the reward is that brief moment of satisfaction and energy boost. Now, what if you swapped out the cookie for a healthy snack or a quick walk outside? The cue stays the same, the routine changes, and the reward could be even better: sustained energy and a sense of accomplishment. Understanding this loop gives you the power to tweak your habits one small step at a time. The first step is awareness. The second is action. Our brains are like plastic, not in a literal sense, of course, but in their ability to change, adapt, and form new pathways, a process known as neuroplasticity. When we repeat an action, our brain strengthens the connections between neurons, making it easier to perform that action in the future. Think of a skier carving paths down a snowy mountain. The more the skier takes the same path, the deeper and more defined that path becomes, until eventually it's the most natural way down. The same thing happens in your brain. The more you perform a habit, the more ingrained it becomes, until it's the path of least resistance. Here's the exciting part. You can consciously carve new paths. If you've always taken the lazy route after dinner, say slumping on the couch, you can create a new path by intentionally going for a 10-minute walk instead. The first few times will feel strange and forced, but the more you do it, the more your brain will recognize this as the new default. Eventually, it will feel just as natural as crashing on the couch. This is the magic of neuroplasticity. It doesn't just apply to habits, but to learning, creativity, and even overcoming trauma. Harnessing it can transform not just your habits, but your entire mindset. Consider this. 40% of the actions you take every day aren't decisions, they're habits. That's almost half of your life on autopilot. And the scary part? These habits can either build you up or tear you down. Let's say you want to get fit. You might think the key is a big, dramatic lifestyle change. But in reality, it's the small, consistent habits that matter. Choosing the stairs over the elevator, swapping out soda for water, doing 10 push-ups every morning. These micro habits might seem insignificant on their own, but they add up to massive change over time. On the flip side, imagine the impact of negative habits, staying up late binge-watching shows, skipping breakfast, or scrolling through social media mindlessly. Each one chips away at your energy, focus, and well-being, bit by bit. These habits might not ruin your life overnight, but they'll steer you steadily down a path of mediocrity and regret. The good news is, you don't have to change everything at once. In fact, trying to do so is a recipe for failure. Start with one habit, one small change. Commit to it, and let it ripple through your life. Remember, you're only one habit away from a completely different life. Let's go deeper into John's story. For years, he was stuck in a vicious cycle. He'd wake up feeling exhausted, grab a quick, unhealthy breakfast, and head straight to the office. His days were filled with stress, and his nights were spent in front of the TV, trying to unwind with a beer and a bag of chips. He knew he was stuck, but he couldn't break free. Every time he tried to change, switching to a healthier breakfast or cutting down on TV time, he'd manage for a few days, maybe a week, but then he'd slip back into his old ways. He felt like he was battling himself, his own mind working against him. It wasn't until he understood the habit loop and the power of cues and rewards that things started to shift. John realized that his habits weren't the problem. They were a symptom of something deeper, his stress and anxiety. Every time he tried to change his habits without addressing the root cause, he was doomed to fail. So he shifted his focus. Instead of trying to force himself to change, he worked on managing his stress. He started meditating for just 5 minutes a day. At first, it felt awkward and pointless, but he stuck with it. Slowly, he began to notice a difference. He felt calmer, more in control. And as his stress levels dropped, he found it easier to make healthier choices. This was John's turning point. He wasn't just changing his habits, he was changing his mindset. He was no longer fighting against himself. Instead, he was working with his mind, understanding his triggers, and finding healthier ways to cope. John's breakthrough came when he connected his habits to his values. He asked himself, what kind of person do I want to be? He realized he wanted to be healthy, energetic, and engaged in life. He didn't want to be the guy who zoned out in front of the TV every night or the guy who couldn't climb a flight of stairs without getting winded. With this clarity, every small choice became easier. Skipping the chips wasn't a sacrifice. It was a step toward the person he wanted to be. Going for a walk wasn't a chore. It was a gift to his future self. This shift in perspective was the key to making his new habits stick. Over time, John built a new habit loop. Instead of stress leading to TV and junk food, it led to a 10-minute meditation, a healthy dinner, and a good book. The cue, stress, was the same. But the routine and the reward had changed completely. And with that, his life began to change too. Changing habits is hard, really hard. Most people fail not because they're not trying, but because they're trying to do too much all at once. It's like deciding to run a marathon when you've never even jogged a mile. You start out strong, full of motivation, but before long, you're exhausted, overwhelmed, and ready to give up. Think about the last time you tried to change a habit. Maybe you wanted to eat healthier, so you cut out all junk food, started a new workout routine, and tried to cook every meal at home. For a few days, you felt great. But then life happened. You had a bad day at work, you were too tired to cook, and before you knew it, you were back on the couch with a bag of chips. The problem isn't lack of willpower, it's that you're asking your brain to do too much. Your brain resists big changes because they're unfamiliar and uncomfortable. That's why the key to lasting change is to start small, really small, as in so small that it feels almost ridiculous. This is where the concept of tiny gains comes in. Improving by just 1% each day doesn't sound like much, but it adds up fast. Imagine a plane flying from Los Angeles to New York. If it changes its course by just 1%, it won't end up in New York. It'll end up hundreds of miles away. That's the power of tiny changes over time. In your life, those tiny changes might look like adding 1 extra glass of water to your day or doing 1 push-up before bed. At first, it doesn't feel like much, but over time, these small actions compound. They build momentum. And before you know it, they've transformed your entire life. The beauty of tiny gains is that they're sustainable. You're not trying to overhaul your entire life in a week. You're just making small, manageable changes that you can stick with. And as you build these small wins, your confidence grows. You start to see yourself as someone who can change, and that belief is incredibly powerful. Willpower is overrated. Most people think they need to will themselves into new habits, but research shows that willpower is like a battery. It gets depleted the more you use it. That's why you might be able to resist temptation in the morning, but cave in by the afternoon. The key is to reduce your reliance on willpower. Instead of forcing yourself to make the right choice in the moment, set up your environment to make the right choice easier. If you want to eat healthier, don't stock your kitchen with junk food. If you want to read more, put a book by your bed and your phone in another room. If you want to work out in the morning, lay out your clothes the night before. These small changes reduce the need for willpower because they make the good choice the path of least resistance, and the less you rely on willpower, the more consistent you'll be. Consistency, not willpower, is what creates lasting change. Let's talk about something that's often overlooked when it comes to building habits: your environment. Think about this. Have you ever tried to quit snacking, only to find yourself reaching for a bag of chips that's right there on the counter? Or maybe you've wanted to read more, but your living room is dominated by a big TV screen, making it easy to get sucked into another episode of your favorite show. Your environment plays a huge role in shaping your behavior. It's not just about willpower or motivation, it's about the cues and triggers around you. If you want to build a habit, you need to design your environment to support that habit. This is called choice architecture, and it's a game changer. Let's say you want to drink more water. Instead of relying on willpower to remember, place water bottles in strategic locations: on your desk, by your bed, in your car. The visual cue will remind you to take a sip every time you see it. Want to exercise more? Lay out your workout clothes the night before, so they're the first thing you see in the morning. Make the path to your new habit as frictionless as possible. Conversely, if you're trying to break a bad habit, make it hard to do. Trying to stop snacking? Don't keep chips and candy in your house. Want to watch less TV? Unplug it and put the remote in a drawer. The more effort it takes to perform a habit, the less likely you are to do it. In short, control your environment and you control your habits. Another crucial factor in habit formation is accountability. We're social creatures, wired to care about what others think. That's why sharing your goals with someone else can significantly increase your chances of success. Let's say you decide to wake up early every day. It's easy to hit the snooze button when no one else knows you're trying to wake up at 5 a.m. But what if you had a friend waiting for you at the gym? Suddenly, it's not just about you. You have someone counting on you, and that added layer of accountability can make all the difference. This is why many people find success in group challenges or online communities. Whether it's a fitness challenge, a book club, or a study group, being part of a community keeps you motivated and accountable. You're not just letting yourself down if you fail, you're letting down the group. And that social pressure can be a powerful motivator. Let's delve into another crucial aspect of habit formation: tracking your progress. There's a psychological principle called the progress principle, which states that the mere act of recording and reflecting on your progress can boost your motivation and drive. Imagine you've set a goal to run every day. On day one, you lace up your shoes and hit the pavement. It's tough, and you're not sure you can keep it up, but then you come home and mark an X on your calendar. It's a small victory, but it feels good. On day two, you run again and mark another X. By day 7, you've got a week's worth of X's in a row. You don't want to break the streak, so you run again. This simple act of tracking creates a sense of momentum and accomplishment. Celebrating these small wins is equally important. Our brains are wired to respond to rewards. Every time you acknowledge your progress, no matter how small, you're giving your brain a hit of dopamine, reinforcing the habit. So reward yourself. After a week of consistent running, treat yourself to a nice meal or a new playlist for your runs. These little rewards keep the momentum going and make the habit stick. Let's dig a little deeper into the 2-minute rule. This strategy, popularized by productivity expert David Allen, is all about overcoming inertia. The rule states that if an action takes less than 2 minutes, you should do it immediately. But there's more to it than just handling quick tasks. The real power of the 2-minute rule is in its ability to get you started on bigger tasks. Want to write a book? Start by writing for just 2 minutes. Want to start exercising? Put on your gym clothes. These tiny actions might seem trivial, but they have a psychological impact. They break down the mental barriers that make big tasks feel daunting. Here's why this works. Once you've started a task, your brain is more likely to want to finish it. It's called the Zeigarnik effect, a psychological phenomenon that makes your brain crave closure on unfinished tasks. So, starting small tricks your brain into wanting to continue. You might sit down to write for 2 minutes and end up writing for 20. The hardest part is getting started, and the 2-minute rule makes that first step effortless. Habit stacking is another powerful technique to make new habits stick. It works by attaching a new habit to an existing one, forming a stack of behaviors that flow naturally from one to the next. This technique leverages the power of context and routine, making it easier to remember and execute your new habit. For example, let's say you want to start a morning stretching routine. If you already have a habit of making coffee every morning, you can stack the new habit onto that existing routine. Every time you start brewing your coffee, you begin a 5-minute stretching session. The existing habit of making coffee acts as a trigger for the new habit of stretching. This strategy is effective because you're not creating a habit in isolation. You're anchoring it to something that's already ingrained in your daily routine. Over time, the two actions become linked in your brain. Just like brushing your teeth automatically leads to flossing for many people, making coffee will lead to stretching without conscious effort. One of the most profound insights in habit formation is the concept of identity-based habits. This idea shifts the focus from what you want to achieve to who you want to become. Instead of setting a goal to read more books, decide to become a reader. Instead of aiming to lose weight, decide to become someone who prioritizes health and fitness. Here's why this matters. Our brains are wired to act in accordance with our self-image. If you see yourself as someone who's not good at math, you're less likely to invest time in learning it. But if you change that identity to, I'm someone who's curious and loves to learn new things, suddenly the prospect of tackling math problems becomes less intimidating. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to become. If you go for a run, you're casting a vote for being an active person. If you read a page of a book, you're casting a vote for being a reader. The more votes you cast for a particular identity, the more it becomes a part of who you are. Over time, these identity-based habits are more likely to stick because they're rooted in how you see yourself, not just in what you want to achieve. Let's explore another powerful story, this one about Sam, an entrepreneur who struggled with procrastination. Sam had big dreams and innovative ideas, but he couldn't seem to take consistent action. Every day, he'd find himself distracted, scrolling through social media, checking emails, or doing anything other than the work that mattered. It wasn't that Sam was lazy or unmotivated. He just felt overwhelmed by the enormity of his goals. The thought of starting a big project made him anxious, so he'd avoid it, opting for easier, less meaningful tasks instead. This cycle of procrastination was killing his business and his confidence. The breakthrough came when Sam learned about the Pomodoro technique, a time management method that involves working in focused 25-minute intervals, followed by a 5-minute break. He decided to give it a try. For the first 25-minute session, he focused solely on outlining a new business strategy. He was amazed at how much he accomplished in such a short time. The Pomodoro technique worked for Sam because it broke down his work into manageable chunks, reducing the mental barrier to starting. Instead of thinking about the entire project, he only had to commit to 25 minutes. This small change in approach led to a massive increase in productivity. Within a few months, Sam had turned his business around. He even started applying the technique to other areas of his life, using it to exercise, learn new skills, and even meditate. Then there's the story of Maria, a high school teacher who wanted to make a difference in her students' lives. She noticed that many of them struggled with self-discipline and motivation, often handing in assignments late or not at all. Maria decided to implement a habit-building challenge in her classroom. She introduced the concept of micro-goals, tiny daily actions that would lead to bigger successes over time. Each student chose a habit they wanted to build, whether it was studying for 10 minutes a day, doing a few push-ups, or simply drinking more water. Maria created a tracking system where students could mark off their progress each day. The results were astonishing. Not only did the students begin to develop new positive habits, but they also became more engaged and motivated in their academic work. They started applying the principles they learned in class to other areas of their lives, from managing their time better to setting goals for the future. Maria's initiative didn't just change the students, it transformed the entire school culture. Other teachers began adopting similar practices, and the students' parents even got involved. It was a ripple effect, showing that the power of habits isn't limited to individuals, it can uplift entire communities. Imagine you're standing at the base of a mountain. You don't need to scale it in one giant leap, you just need to take one step. The compound effect is this idea in action. The principle that small, consistent actions over time create massive results. Think about a drop of water hitting a rock. One drop might seem insignificant, but over years, that same drop can erode the hardest stone. The same is true with your habits. If you save just $1 a day, it might seem trivial at first, but over time, with compound interest, you'll build significant wealth. Similarly, exercising for just 10 minutes each day may seem too small to matter. But over a year, those 10-minute sessions add up to over 60 hours of exercise. The key to unlocking the power of the compound effect is consistency. This is why focusing on building small habits that you can sustain is far more powerful than setting grand goals that you abandon after a few weeks. In the long term, it's not about how fast you go, it's about maintaining steady progress. Keep this in mind. It's not the intensity of your actions that leads to success, but the consistency. One of the biggest breakthroughs in habit formation comes when you no longer have to think about your new behavior. It becomes automatic. Automation is the process of turning a new habit into something that happens without conscious effort, like brushing your teeth or locking the door when you leave the house. This happens through a process called chunking, where your brain takes multiple actions and combines them into a single sequence that it can run on autopilot. For example, when you first learn to drive a car, every action, turning the wheel, using the pedals, checking your mirrors, required conscious thought. But over time, those actions became so automatic that now you can drive home from work without even thinking about it. The same principle applies to habits. The more consistently you repeat a behavior, the more automatic it becomes. This is why sticking to small, easy-to-do habits at first is critical. Once you've automated a habit, it becomes a part of your identity, freeing up mental energy for other tasks. While consistency is key, flexibility is equally important. Life is unpredictable, and there will be days when you're unable to stick to your routine. The mistake most people make is thinking they've failed if they miss a day, leading to the what the hell effect, where one missed workout or one unhealthy meal leads to a downward spiral. Instead, embrace flexibility. Accept that setbacks are part of the process and focus on getting back on track as quickly as possible. If you miss a day, don't worry. Just make sure you don't miss two. This mindset prevents the all or nothing thinking that often derails progress and helps you maintain momentum in the long run. Remember, building lasting habits isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. You don't need to be flawless, you just need to be consistent enough to make progress over time. Let's talk about Emily, a working mother of two who felt like she never had time for herself. Between her demanding job, taking care of her kids, and managing the household, Emily's days were packed. She felt exhausted and overwhelmed, constantly putting her own needs last. One day, Emily came across the concept of habit stacking and decided to apply it in her own life. She realized she didn't need large blocks of free time to take care of herself. She could find moments within her existing routines. Emily started by stacking a 5-minute meditation session onto her morning routine of making coffee. While the coffee brewed, she would sit quietly and focus on her breathing. At night, she stacked a quick 10-minute yoga session onto her kids' bedtime routine. These small changes transformed Emily's life. She didn't need hours at the gym or a weekend retreat to feel rejuvenated. These tiny, stacked habits helped her feel more centered and energized, giving her the mental clarity to handle the chaos of daily life with more grace. Over time, Emily's small habits accumulated into big changes, helping her carve out more time for herself and improve her overall well-being. Then there's Marcus, a competitive athlete who faced a devastating injury that sidelined him for months. Marcus was used to intense training sessions and pushing his body to the limit, but after tearing a ligament, he found himself unable to perform even the most basic exercises. This sent him into a deep frustration. He felt like he was losing all the progress he had worked so hard for. Instead of giving up, Marcus decided to focus on what he could control, his daily habits. He broke his recovery into small, manageable steps. Instead of focusing on the long road ahead, he made it a habit to perform just 5 minutes of rehab exercises each day. He focused on building strength slowly, one tiny habit at a time. Over time, those 5-minute sessions became 10, then 20, and eventually Marcus was back on the field. By the time he was fully recovered, Marcus had not only healed physically, but he had developed a new mindset of patience and resilience. His injury, which once seemed like a setback, became an opportunity to rebuild himself both mentally and physically. One of the biggest obstacles people face when trying to build new habits is the all-or-nothing mentality. You've probably experienced this yourself, setting a goal to work out 5 days a week only to miss one day and feel like a failure. This black and white thinking is a trap that leads to discouragement and giving up. The truth is, progress isn't linear, and you don't need to be perfect to succeed. In fact, research shows that people who allow themselves to slip up occasionally but quickly get back on track are more likely to stick with their habits in the long run. It's not about how many days you do it perfectly, it's about showing up more often than not. So when you miss a workout or have an off day, don't beat yourself up. Just recommit to the next opportunity. The goal isn't to be flawless, it's to be resilient. Remember, even imperfect action is better than no action at all. Another common pitfall is the plateau of latent potential. When you start a new habit, you're excited and motivated. But after a few weeks, you might not see the results you expected, and it's easy to get discouraged. This is when many people quit, thinking their efforts aren't paying off. The reality is that progress often happens below the surface. Think of it like an ice cube sitting in a cold room. The temperature gradually increases from 25 degrees Fahrenheit to 26 degrees Fahrenheit to 27 degrees Fahrenheit, but the ice cube doesn't melt. It's not until the temperature hits 32 degrees Fahrenheit that you see the ice start to change. Your habits work the same way. You may not see immediate results, but every small action is building momentum, and eventually you'll hit that tipping point where everything clicks. This is why patience and persistence are so important. Trust that the work you're doing is paying off, even if you can't see the immediate effects. Stay consistent, and eventually your efforts will compound into visible, meaningful change. As we wrap up this journey into the world of habits, there's one key message to take away. You have the power to design your life, one small habit at a time. Change isn't about massive overhauls or overnight success. It's about the tiny, consistent actions you take each day. You've learned about the habit loop, the power of neuroplasticity, and the importance of starting small. You've seen real-life examples of how individuals, just like you, transform their lives by focusing on building positive habits and breaking free from negative ones. Remember, the road to lasting change is long and sometimes challenging, but every small step you take brings you closer to the person you want to be. Don't worry about being perfect. Focus on showing up, doing the work, and trusting the process. Over time, those small actions will add up to something extraordinary. So take a moment to reflect. What's one small habit you can start today? It doesn't need to be big or dramatic, just something that aligns with the person you want to become. Whether it's drinking an extra glass of water, reading one page of a book, or taking a short walk, that small step is the beginning of your transformation. The power is in your hands. You are the architect of your habits and ultimately the architect of your life.